you would see now and then politicians doing this. And when AOC started going into it, I started digging into it a bit more because I had the same preconceptions that you mentioned. Oh, it's just younger people. And then when I saw the stats that like not only more women than you think are playing games, but also the fact that, as you said, people over 35. And so I'm like, this is something that's bubbling underneath the surface that a lot of people may not realize is impacting our politics.
Is the next president of the United States playing video games tonight?
Hey everybody, what's up? How's it going? Sorry, we're like trying something new here. Let's do this thing. Okay, I'm gonna need like probably some
look at
coaching.
you. Oh,
I'm
Lord.
No, you're just being nice. You're being nice to me. I wanted to just show off a little bit of my Stardew farm for you guys. I have two. This is my personal farm, which is Alexandria. And then I started a new farm last night, which I named the AOC farm.
Yep, that is AOC playing a little Madden with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in 2024 and showing off her farm on Stardew Valley. She also went live on Twitch playing Among Us with some famous gamers as part of her campaign back in 2020 as well. Now, whether AOC runs for president is an open question, but whether she's a gamer, that's not up for debate. Many politicians are known to play a game or two, from Governor of Colorado Jared Polis to California Congressman Scott Peters. At first, you might think that video games and politics have nothing in common, but you may be surprised to know political campaigns are and have been using video games and streaming platforms like Twitch to reach voters. Video games are a powerful cultural force, of course. We know that here on Gamer Galaxy. It spans across generations and demographics. And yes, games are popular among the younger generations, Gen A and Gen Z. But according to the ESA, or the Entertainment Software Association, half of the 205.1 million Americans that play video games are ages 35 and up. So, makes a lot of sense, right? Be where the people are. But not many people know that this is the case. That's what we're exploring today in this episode. Welcome back to Gamer Galaxy. I'm your host, Cher, and this is your launchpad for everything gamers care about. Gaming is bigger for politics than we realize. That's the name of a Substack article I read recently that both blew my mind and confirmed something that I knew to be true. My guest today is the author of that article, Katie Harbath. She is ex-Facebook, now CEO of Anchor Change, where she is known as the election whisperer to the tech industry. She's also the author of a new book called Disrupting Politics. Hi, Katie. How are you? Thank you so much for coming on Gamer Galaxy.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Me too. So, like I said, I came across your Substack and I was like, wait, somebody else is talking about this. What?
Yeah, for me too, I feel like nobody really pays attention to this. And I've been following, frankly, going all the way back to the early 2000s when Second Life was a big thing. Like you would see now and then politicians doing this. And when AOC started going into it, I started digging into it a bit more because I had the same preconceptions that you mentioned. Oh, it's just younger people. And then when I saw the stats that like not only more women than you would think are playing games, but also the fact that, as you said, people over 35. And so I'm like, this is something that's bubbling underneath the surface that a lot of people may not realize is impacting our politics.
Yeah, I've been interested in this for a very long time too, and I've seen it like over the years, but nobody talked about it again. So, how did you even come across this topic, and what interested you about it?
So I've always been interested in how different technologies are impacting our politics. First, when I was working in campaigns in the early 2000s, then my 10 years at Facebook, as you mentioned. And so I'm always looking for what are those new edges that campaigns are trying to find and discover, because it's hard to find new pockets of people to persuade. And it really was AOC starting to do, I think it was when she did Minecraft, might have been the first one that she did, that got me digging into it. And then more recently, I decided I wanted to do this series looking at all the different companies and tech platforms that might impact the midterms. And I wanted to look at the ones we talk about all the time, your Facebooks, your Instagrams, et cetera, but then the ones we don't talk a lot about. And so doing one on gaming was really important to me because I'd been talking to people that work at Twitch, work at some of these other platforms, and they're trying to think through these policies. And I was like, we need to bring more attention to this, because one of the things I think a lot about too is like, where are the risk factors that we're not thinking about in terms of impacting our election? So it was all of those things together that made me want to write about this specifically.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Me and my friend group always talk about these live streams. I don't want to say a lot, but when it comes up, we do. And some people um, know that gaming is mainstream, like probably you and I. Um, but then there's other people who don't touch that subject with a 10-foot pole. Why do you think that is?
I think some of it is perhaps that for those of us who grew up playing Nintendo and Sega, that it feels a little frivolous, maybe a little luxurious that you can do that. And so you don't want to look or sound childish as an adult, but you see that a lot of adults do play games, as we see from the stats. So it's just something that people do to wind down with and don't talk a lot about. I also think too, you either know it's mainstream or you don't, depending upon if you did it as a kid, if you kept doing it as an adult, if you have kids who do it. Like for me, it was my brother. Like I don't play games all the time, but he's playing World of Warcraft with his friends and talking about how they're all talking to one another and stuff like that on that. And then talking to my nephews who are during COVID, that's how they stayed in touch with their friends, was by playing those types of games online. And so I think it's just really a mix of who's in your space and what are you talking about, and thus is it something that you understand that's impacting our culture.
You mentioned your brother talking with other friends through it. I mean, do you believe that it's the new or the a new era of social platforms or social media, I guess, or community
I
building, I guess?
I do think it is, but I don't think it's as new as we think it is. Like I do think it's been around a lot longer in different formats, but I think it's that people are wanting community. And as social media platforms have gone more and more to unconnected content and being more entertainment driven, people are going now to messaging services, groups, closed places where they can have those interactions with people and be able to stay friends with folks that are living not just all over the country, but all over the world. And so I do think that whether it is, again, World of Warcraft, Twitch, whatever your favorite places that has a live chat, I do think it's becoming a place where folks are like, hey, let's get together tonight and do this. And while they're playing, they can also catch up what's happening in their lives.
If I may, can we talk a little bit about your what you did at Facebook and kind of how you transitioned into what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my career has had sort of three chapters so far. I started in Republican politics in the early 2000s, early social media days. Then in 2011, I moved over to Facebook, where I built the teams that work with politicians and governments on how to use the platform, both the blue Facebook app, but then also Instagram and WhatsApp as we started to get those. And then I coordinated all the companies' work on global elections from 2013 to 2019. So that's where I got both the helping people learn how to use it, politicians talk to voters, and then after 2016, really into more of the trust and safety space, political ad transparencies, your policies around politics, freedom of expression, mis and disinformation, foreign interference, all of those types of things. And then when I left 5.5 years ago, I wanted to there were still a lot of open questions about how these tech platforms were impacting our politics. A lot of additional companies wanted help. There were a lot of think tanks and nonprofits that really didn't understand how these decisions were made inside the companies. I went to UW Madison for journalism, so I wanted to get back into writing, which is why I started the Substack as well. And so I've had a mix of what people call a portfolio career the last 5.5 years between writing, tech companies as clients, as well as nonprofits and think tanks.
What did you learn? I guess you were in politics this entire time and steering kind of Facebook in those waters, as we know they play a huge role in politics. Um, what is like one thing you learned in Facebook that kind of drives what you do today?
Yeah. I think one is that you oftentimes, when you're working inside of a tech company or even outside of it, by the time you realize the impact you're having, let's just talk in the political space. By the time you get to that point and like it's mainstream, it's too late to like really be thinking about your values and your policies and to be impacting those. Like you should really be thinking about those a lot sooner. And this is something I share a lot with gaming companies because a lot of them will be like, we're not a political platform. We're not, no, no, no. They know politics is happening on it, but they don't want to be known for that. And one of the things I tell them is you can run, but you can't hide. If you're where the people are, that's where the politicians are going to go. And so you have to be ready for the positive sides of that, but then how also people might try to manipulate that. And I've learned so much in the last 25 years, things I would do differently, things I would do the same, how you can like, how to be thinking about these policies and sort of the unintended consequences that can come from them. That part of the reason I write my newsletter and I wrote the book and everything about that too was to try to get people thinking about these types of things sooner because it can be very easy to want to just stick your head in the sand, but that's not going to serve you in the long run.
You mentioned you talked to gaming companies about
Mhm.
this. Can you take me through what your conversations are like with them?
Yeah, I mean, just last week, I was at a conference called TrustCon, which is a conference for trust and safety professionals that work across a ton of different tech platforms. So they're the ones writing the policies and building the products to try to keep people safe online. And we were in a workshop talking about political influencers. How do you define who
Mm.
a political influencer is? Do you allow them to monetize? How should they disclose if they're being paid by a campaign or not? Around that. And so I was talking to one of the platforms and they were like, well, we don't allow the politicians can be on, but they can't monetize. And I was like, okay, well, what if they're a guest of a influencer? Like, can they monetize? If an influencer starts talking about politics, like, can they monetize? And that was just one part of a rabbit hole I was sort of taking them down. But as often happens with these subjects, you just start peeling back the layers of the onion and it gets harder and harder and harder. And I was just curious to know how they were thinking about it because they know it's happening on their platform and they don't necessarily want to shut it down, but they also want to be careful that they're not opening themselves for reputational risk or getting fines or regulated or anything like that.
That's so interesting. I mean, definitely. I mean, with AI and things just becoming more and more and more chronically online, or we are also chronically online, and businesses are going online. Probably all of them are online at this point, but it's so important to talk about those kinds of things and to preempt and be proactive is super super important. Um, and thanks for facilitating those conversations. That's so important. I think we need more of that than we think.
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think that I am trying like these could be very scary subjects for people to talk about. And especially if they're in Silicon Valley and they're not used to working in politics, they're like, am I just putting a big target on my back for somebody to yell at me and people, I don't know which way I'm supposed to go. And we're just talking about the US, let alone thinking about this globally is really hard for folks. But these are what I call a lot of these things are impossible trade offs. There's no one clear answer. And it's sort of a question of where are you willing to have more risk than not for these companies. And so what I try to do is help walk them through their different options and sort of how different decisions they might make may play out for them over the course of not just one election cycle, but two. Because right now I tell people don't just think about this through November because the 2028 presidential cycle starts as soon as this midterm is over, right? It's already started. And so you have to have an always on strategy for that. And so I try to help walk them through and kind of think through that and then also pivot as things change.
yeah. Kind of circling back a little bit, for those Americans who still think that video games have nothing to do with politics, what is your strongest evidence that they should be paying attention right now?
I think for me, it's frankly the number of people that are playing games either daily and weekly, and the fact that of how many people, not just 35 plus, but retirees and seniors who are too. I think like it's a number there it's a numbers game on all of that. And then the fact that you are seeing, it's interesting. We've had more examples on the Democratic side than I found on the Republican side, but I wouldn't be surprised if that starts to shift a little bit more as we go into this next cycle. But the fact that campaigns are choosing to have their candidates spend time on these platforms, especially somebody like AOC, to me, that's a little bit of there's smoke, there's fire.
Yes, indeed. I, snaps, snaps, snaps. um, okay, so in your Substack article, which I will link for people who want to take a look at it and read it in the description notes or the show notes. So you said campaigns often treat gaming as a nice gimmick instead of a strategic channel. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and I actually think this might be changing for some folks. But by nice gimmick, I mean, oftentimes when you see a newer technology or something that hasn't been talked about in mainstream press a lot, of which gaming and politics is one of them, you will see campaigns they'll be like, we're going to buy some ads on here, or we're going to do a one-time thing, because then we can pitch it to the press of, hey, look at us doing this cool, innovative thing. Maybe we can get some earned media out of it. But they don't necessarily see it as a core place to find voters. AOC again, and she's probably the only one I've seen so far, to her, I wouldn't be surprised if it's more of a strategic channel, because if she was seeing it as a nice gimmick, she would have just done it once. But instead, you're seeing her do it multiple times across multiple different platforms. And I think she realizes, well, yes, a lot of people 35 plus are playing these games. It is really big too in that 18 to 34 demographic,
Mhm.
of which you are seeing them move, especially males, they've moved much more towards Trump in the past. And so I think she's like, if there's a chance for us to bring them back, it's that age group, and it's going to be through gaming, and I need to be there very early on, because they're not just somebody I can go and show up once and they're going to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to like now support you. It has to be something that you're like showing that you're part of the community and regularly, and like actually playing. Like you could tell from that clip you showed, like she's actually playing, right? Like she's figuring this stuff out. So I think she may be a differentiator here on that, but that's what I meant by that line.
Is there anybody else you saw using gaming for their strategy or campaigns in general? Because I've seen like local level election or like candidates use them, but I'm curious what you've seen.
I mean, you saw the both Biden Harris and Harris Walls campaign doing some stuff on gaming, buying some ads. Obama also did stuff back in '08. He did virtual billboards in games and stuff like that. So again,
Oh,
you've
okay.
seen some of the campaigns like dabble in this. They've also, I think I'm looking here, refreshing my memory. They did a split screen during some of the Tim Wall's rally, excuse me, a split screen of like in a gaming platform of his rally, and then people also playing games and stuff like that. So you've seen some of that experimentation, but in all honesty, and I did a search right before we talked too, it is hard to find examples of folks doing this, which doesn't mean it's not happening, but it's not, again, it's why you and I are talking. It's just not something that is being covered a lot by mainstream press.
Should we be talking about it more?
Yes, 100%. Like it should be, I think that it would be really interesting if I were a reporter and had the time going and talking to particularly digital operatives and consultants, right? Because they're ones that are oftentimes advising these campaigns. They're staying on top of trends. And I'd be really curious to know how they're thinking about it from a strategic standpoint, and how they're thinking about experimenting with it as we go into the next cycle. And again, just the pure numbers say it's something that perhaps you should be like, I would, if I had all the money, I would do polling and also ask people like, of those who I think are persuadable towards me potentially, how many of them are playing games? What platforms are they playing that on? Like I would dig into some of those things, because this goes into the micro targeting that campaigns have been doing for decades now of, again, where can I find those pockets of people? And again, I know I keep repeating myself, but it says something that AOC keeps going back to this. I feel like I don't know, but I feel like they must have numbers. I want to go like somebody needs to go ask their campaign, and I don't know if they'd give it up,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do think we should be talking about it more because I think that it is very easy to just keep talking about the same platforms over and over and over again. It's very easy to be like, now the new shiny thing is AI, and we don't oftentimes look at the things that people are doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, like we saw last presidential campaign, podcasting was the new
Yeah.
thing, right? And it really hugely made an impact in the polls. But obviously, you saw President Trump and obviously Kamala Harris show up in podcasts. Do you think we'll see more of that happening in the game space?
I do, depending upon the policy decisions some of these platforms make, because I
Mm.
think some of them, if I am an influencer on any of these platforms and I'm trying to make money that way, and if the platform says the minute you have a politician on or you become a paid political influencer, you can no longer monetize on our platform. Now I've got to make a decision about like where I want to be making the money from. Another one too is sort of a lot of people are turned off by politics. And so you also saw in 2024 there were a lot of very popular podcasts that didn't want to have politicians on because they didn't want to anger one side or the other of their audience base. And so, and if you want to have brand deals, because we've seen this too recently, that if you're an influencer and you're talking about politics, brands might be less likely to want to partner with you because they view it as risky around all of that. So if I'm an influencer, I have to weigh all of that. And so campaigns, I think, might have a challenge, might want to do it, but have a challenge in terms of how to do it and who to do it with, because they have to take all those factors into account.
Do you know if these campaigns inside of games actually work?
We don't. That is sort of the $1,000,000 question of
Got it.
whether or not they actually move people. I recently, it's not released yet, but did a poll of about 1,000 voters that I'm able to do with the org I work with called the Rainey Center about around influencers in general. And what was interesting is if you look at the 18 to 65 plus and you ask them, has your political positions on something changed because an influencer said something? Vast majority say no. But if you start breaking it down by age, it's the 18 to 34-year-old males who voted for Trump that are more likely to say yes, that it has. And so I think so one of the hard things is most people don't go around being like, yes, it was this exact moment when I changed my mind on who I'm going to vote for, what issue I'm going to do, et cetera. So that makes it really hard to study this and know for sure, which was why I think you see a lot of campaigns throwing a lot of spaghetti up against the wall. Okay, we're going to try gaming. We're going to try this. We're going to try this. See what helps us to move the needle. And it's the ones that are willing to play the long game that I think are willing to play this out over the next couple of years to see if it helped them, because podcasts have been around for a long time. Campaigns have been doing podcasts for a long time. It's just that the electorate and what they were listening to and watching sort of caught up to that in the zeitgeist. I wouldn't be surprised if gaming continues to do that as well.
Yeah, I would imagine. In terms of the in terms of the things that actually work, I mean, you don't really see if like rallies necessarily like are work or not,
Yard
right?
signs.
Like, right, exactly. So everything's kind of up in the air. It's just
You never
politics in
know.
general.
Most voters really don't start paying attention until like the week before, if not like the night before the election,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The reason people still do yard signs is that most people, when they go into the ballot box, they may know who's running for president. I hope they know who's running for Senate, but like, do they know who their member of Congress is? Do they know state senator, things like that? And so part of the reason yard signs work is they're hoping people, when you get in the ballot, being like, oh, I saw that yard sign in my friend's yard and I trust them. So, okay, if they've got that person, I'll vote for them there. It could also be too, oh, I was playing games last night. I was watching this streamer and he seems to like this person. So, all right, I trust him. I don't have time to go and dig into this person's, or I saw them on a stream or something like that. So, you never know that one thing that's going to like trigger somebody to actually vote for you, which is why you see campaigns, again, try to be in a lot of different places.
Yeah, yeah. You had mentioned, like people are put off by politics, especially when
Mhm.
they're trying to blow off steam or play games and things. I wonder if the best method, is just to show face and just play the games instead of
Yes.
talking about all your, political
Yes.
agendas and stuff. Talk more about that and some of the avenues that politicians can take inside the games.
Yeah, I think you are 100% right in that a lot of people want to know who a politician is as a person. I actually thought Trump did this very well in a way that Harris didn't, which was that, on like Joe Rogan or something like that, he's talking about a lot of other different things. He's not necessarily immediately going into the policies and stuff like that. I think Walls is a very good example of that too. He's very good at sort of sharing the personal of who he is. And so I would recommend to a campaign, view a gaming or a streaming platform not as a place to share your policy agenda, but to show people who you are. But you can't fake it being a part of the community. So if you do like games and you play with your kids, something like that, like great, go for it. AOC, she's actually playing. She seems to know what she's talking about. If you don't, you can still go talk to them, but like be honest about the fact that like, hey, I don't do this a lot, but I'm super interested in it. Like it's an area that I'm trying to learn more in. So being authentic to who you are and going into these communities, I think will be really important. And it's finding the right also cultural moment when people want to be talking about politics. So like right now, most of the time, people don't want to be listening to it. But as you get closer to the election, people are thinking about it more. Or if there's a moment in time like when Biden dropped out and Harris came in, you saw across TikTok and a lot of other platforms just people being really excited about her candidacy. And that would have been a moment in time for her to potentially go on some of these and just be talking about here's who I am as a person, and tapping into that excitement, without bringing the like boring policy stuff into
Yeah.
it.
I know you also mentioned that ads are a way to, like, Obama had put in ads inside games. I know. So recently there was some news about how the streaming platforms could be more ad friendly and changing that scope. And there's a lot happening in the games industry right now in that sense. But are there any like policies, or like, if, like, say, if the games industry went this certain way, it would make for a better platform for candidates?
Oh, well, I think candidates would really love it if the platforms would allow them to run ads. Each platform kind of has their own way of thinking about that, but like that's a number one way that campaigns still think about how to reach folks, and it's something they can do. It's something they can do at scale. Another one would be from the candidate end is that they allow politician accounts. They allow politicians to be on there, those types of things. I think on the flip side, though, it is, do they allow political ads? Like, what's the balance between the amount of money you can make versus what your users feel on that? And then also, do you allow accounts to be anonymous? That's a big risk vector when it comes to foreign interference and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
especially in today's day and age with AI, like one of the things I'm worried about is AI created influencers that look like they're Americans, but they're not. It's the in 2016 it was Russians running ads pretending to be Americans, and now it's going to be like Russians pretending to be American influencers using AI. And so there's just a bunch of new risk factors for these platforms that they have to think about of how do we tackle that, or do we just ban it altogether? And so it's a really tricky kind of question for both of them. But I think at the end of the day, each platform has to think about, is this a conversation that folks want to be having on our platform? Do we want to facilitate that? And if so, how? And if we don't, are we okay with it going to a competitor? And
Mm.
that answer might be yes. But I just want folks to realize that deciding no or a non-decision is a decision in amongst itself, that can have consequences. Because just to give a really quick example, back in the early 2010s, you're kind of seeing it today too, but like Facebook, then Twitter and YouTube are really fighting for high profile individuals to be creating accounts on their platforms because they were fighting for relevance. They were trying to prove that they were relevant to the conversation, they were relevant to the culture. Because if you had those people on your platforms, that means the users want to be on your platforms to see what they have to say. And if they're on the platform, then you can monetize it and you can run ads to them. And so I think I would imagine gaming companies are going through some of the same calculations.
Yeah. The foreign interference is also a huge thing that I've also been thinking a lot about, and yeah, I can't wait to dive into that deep dark hole.
It's a
um,
deep dark hole, and it's a whole other conversation of talking about. And it'd be really interesting. It's been hard for me. Maybe you haven't. It's been hard for me to find global breakdowns of gaming and what that looks like.
you're right. I've been looking on like the UN, like that kind of stuff, and their research, but there's really not much available at all, and I'm very surprised. You know, well, that's for a different conversation. Just one note there, like I do think people need to be more concerned about it than I know we like to kind of push things aside, those kinds of scary thoughts aside, so that we can live our daily lives. But yeah, it's such an important piece
I
of. Yeah, go ahead.
We were talking about some of the things I learned from my Facebook years. And when I look back at the pre-election night 2016 and before time period, we were not doing enough to look under the rocks, to look for the new unique ways that people were going to abuse our platforms. Right now it feels like hindsight's 2020. Like, how could you not have seen that? Right. But like, it really was not. We were thinking of traditional cybersecurity. We were thinking about things in a more traditional way. And so that's why when you asked me, should we be talking about this more? I said yes, because this is one of those where I'm like, you look, the numbers are there, the people are there, people are talking about it. And if I'm a foreign adversary trying to influence the conversation, because no one's paying attention to this is where I would be, because I can fly underneath the radar screen by doing this. And so for me, it has the recipe of being a place that perhaps either after this election or the next presidential, we're like, oh my God, how do we not know that this was a big place that this stuff was happening at?
Yeah, that's why we need more attention here and
Yeah.
more talking around game and game adjacent topics. Speaking on the safety aspect, obviously games are for a lot of different demographics, adults and kids. Should candidates be allowed to, campaign in these places where kids also thrive in? And like an ethical kind of question there.
So I think the big thing is most campaigns aren't going to want to because they can't vote. So
True.
the tricky part the tricky part is, are you a platform where you have a lot of 16, 17-year-olds, and are you going to try to play a long game that like, hey, I want to start like
Future
introducing
voters.
myself to them now because by 2028 they're going to be a first-time voter.
Mhm.
And so do you want to think about it that way? I think most campaigns, because of the focus on child safety, don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, nor do the platforms want them to. So I think that it's a pretty easy thing, assuming that you can tell if somebody is, it's very hard to do age assurance and what
Mhm.
age people are at. We're learning that very much right now with these child bans.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue just because most of them don't vote.
That makes sense. I didn't even put the 2 and 2 together. Cheryl, come on.
No, but it's
Uh,
easy. Like, it's such a big topic of conversation right now, right? And I think that one of the areas too that we're not talking enough about is and I find I tend to do this too. I talk a lot about the like, okay, the mechanics, like how are they using it? Are they monetizing it? All of that. But then there's also the policy aspect of it. How are they regulating it? How is a candidate, when they get into office, how are they going to be thinking about whether or not, I mean, this has been talked about for a long time about games. Like, how do you put ratings on them? Who do you allow to play them or not? Like, what do those rules look like? And so that's also from a policy perspective and what people are allowed to do in these platforms, especially as this stuff continues to meld together, right? Like, it is we throughout the day, I'll speak for myself on my iPhone. When I'm idling, I might be playing a game, then I might be going to the news, then I might be watching something else, right? Like, we're kind of multitasking between all of these, and trying to think about like how what we're allowed to see when we're doing that's just a very hard question to answer.
How can we expect our society to think about all these different aspects when media and just people in general aren't talking about it? They're like being
I
totally opposed. Yeah.
So one of the things I try to do myself twice a year. I've been recommending to a lot of people. I call it a news audit, but it is really sort of a content consumption audit, meaning
Mm.
most of the time we're going through our day and we're not really consciously thinking about the fact, okay, how much time am I spending on this platform? What news organizations am I going to? What influencers am I watching? All of those types of things. So what I try to do is for like a week, really consciously think about how am I spending my time? Where
Mhm.
am I going? Does it match where I want to be getting news and information? Be paying attention to if I am playing games. Oh, what's happening in the chat thread? Like, is it actually talking about the news of the day? Is it not? Like, how is that impacting me? And do I want to make changes for it? Because I think it's really hard for us as individuals to like, we only have so much control about what other people do, but we can control what we do and where we choose to spend our time. And I think the first step is just from time to time consciously thinking about is where I'm spending my time where I actually want to be.
Control what you can control.
Yep.
Yep. Um, should we dive into the influencer side to
Yeah.
things? I know we have touched on it here and there, but I want to see what people are talking about right now. I know you just said you went to a conference to talk about these things. What was the topic of conversation there?
So the topic of conversation in the workshop that I was in was particularly around political influencers. And it started with how do you even define who a political influencer is? Do independent journalists count if they talk about politics? How do you define an independent journalist versus somebody at an organization? Like it's again and there were folks like me who have been thinking about this for a very long period of time. There were people that this was sort of their first time that are kind of like, where do I start? Like, where do I even
Fair.
begin to think about this, right? Should we be trying to draw the lines or not? And then there was a discussion. So it's like, how do you define it? Then there was the transparency piece. How do you disclose it? And this is, again, also super tricky because most of those transactions don't happen on platform. They happen off of a platform, which really leaves the company's very limited ability to prove that I'm being paid by an entity or not in which to do that. But in this polling I mentioned that I haven't released yet, but will be on my Substack. So subscribe if you want to get more. Is that people do want transparency from political influencers if they are being paid for by a campaign. And that's not just money transacting, but like, are you like the DNC famously paid for a lot of influencers, did their hotel, stuff like that to go to the conventions. But also, I thought was interesting is that people want campaigns to be the ones that have to do the disclosure. They weren't necessarily putting it on the companies to have to do it. So they want to just like most people might know, campaigns have to disclose every so often who their donors are, where they're spending money, stuff like that. And so they wanted that to be sort of something that the campaigns do. Now, the tricky part of this, and we talked about this too in this workshop, is what I call the transparency paradox, which is voters want transparency, whether it's around campaigns using AI or working with influencers. But if they see that, voters claim they trust it less. Now,
Mm.
I think the big question is if you also ask people if they like negative campaigning, most people say no. But the reason campaigns keep doing it is that it works. So this is going to be the big question around sort of influencers and stuff like that that we'll be paying attention to around this, and what these platforms are having to decide is again, and then also do you monetize it? Like, can people run ads? What does that look like? So they're just trying to kind of work through, because what they are seeing is what we're talking about here today. They are increasingly seeing more political influencers or influencers talking about politics, or politicians coming on their platforms, that they're like, this is not something that's going away. So we need to
Mm.
start being proactive and thinking about it. Part of the reason why too, and I like, it's just something that I'm paying a lot more attention to, and I haven't quite figured out like how to like kind of talk about it. But more and more and more, it feels like starting with Obama in '08, every election cycle, we have seen the cultural conversation and the political conversation start to blend more and more and more. And so as that happens and people are like talking about politics is talking about our culture and what is happening, I think some influencers are going to go the route of, like, I think about like the Kelsey brothers, right? And stuff like that, where they're going to be like, we're not touching politics with a 10-foot pole. But then there's going to be other influencers who are like, maybe this is my niche. Maybe this is how I set myself apart. Or they see like what some of these other political influencers are making, and they're like, I'm never going to be as big as those guys, but maybe this is how I'm going to set myself apart in these worlds and try to make money that way. And so I think you're gonna see different influencers making different strategies. You're gonna see campaigns to going there more. The news, and what you're going to see, it's going to be people like me talking about it, but then reporters are going to start looking for, okay, where are the unique story angles that I can be looking at for some of this, and they'll start digging into it more too. Because I'll just note, like, podcasting in 2023, I went and talked to a news organization that's a radio station, a very big radio organization that I will not name, but I remember telling him podcasting is going to be huge. And I was a lot of skepticism in that room that podcasts were going to be a place that campaigns went, because at the time, it still wasn't something a lot of folks were talking about. You weren't seeing a lot of campaigns on it, et cetera. Lo and behold, a year and a half later, 2 years later, that's what ended up happening. And so it's one of those things of like, the news media and mainstream media tends to be catching up to where the world is versus leading and like trying to like predict where the world's going.
Yeah. I knew that podcasting was going to be big as well, but I didn't see the politics connection until it
No.
happened. So that's so interesting. The other thing I'm also seeing when it comes to like the influencer space and the politics space kind of colliding is also the opposite direction. So like the politician, well, not just politicians, but like the strategy people. So like the
Oh
Democratic
yeah.
and Republican strategists who talk about politics are also hopping on to these YouTube and live
Yeah.
streams and all these things to become these influencers in their own right, and kind of I feel like it's a vice versa
Yeah.
thing.
Well, and I think that, it used to be when you worked for a campaign, your name was not supposed to be in the press. Your name was not supposed to be public.
Right.
It was supposed to be about the
Just intent.
candidate.
Mhm.
Everything needed to be about the candidate. But as time has gone on and more of these consultants that become campaign managers, et cetera, they are getting a lot more attention. People do want to hear from them because they see them as an arm of sort of the campaign and what they think. And also, a lot of campaigns have used surrogates for a very long period of time. Other popular people who liked them, we now call them influencers. Like back in the day, it was former members of Congress or former, business leaders and stuff like that around all of that. And so I think that just as you're seeing businesses like Starbucks trying to use their employees to help to build out their social presence, I think you will see campaigns doing the same thing, because over the years, these folks have built out their personas and their followings. And if I'm a candidate who I really don't play games, I don't know the first thing about Fortnite or Twitch or any of this, but turns out my deputy campaign manager, when he wants to distress, is going to play this game in the 2 hours he has off in a night. Like, maybe I'll utilize him to be the one that's talking to that community because he understands that community. He's already a part of it.
Yeah, I love that. Wanted to wrap things up here. Is there any other topics that you feel like are missing in this conversation? I feel like we touched on a lot, but I wanted to see if you had any
Yeah,
other.
I think one thing too is that we talked about it a little bit, but I feel like we also talk about streaming and gaming as two separate things, or
Mhm.
like podcasting, streaming, and gaming as separate
Yeah.
things. And I feel like they are blending together a lot more too, around all of that. And so I'll be very curious to see, there's a lot of like with YouTube being so popular, you're seeing places like Instagram and Substack and all of that. Like, how do we create things on TV for people to be able to play? What does it look like on mobile? What does it look like with wearables is going to be a really interesting one too, of like,
Why? Yeah.
as
How come?
well, I don't know if how familiar you are with the the Meta Ray-Ban
Yeah.
glasses that, yeah, I would imagine at some point in time there was the Oculus, right? And I played with that like during COVID and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I'll be curious to see over time, like Pokemon Go and stuff like that. Are there going to be ways with those
Transferred over.
augmented reality that you can do it through your glasses? And then like, actually this is really, I have no idea how Meta's doing this, but like if I look at a campaign side and I've got AI glasses on and I'm like, hey Meta, tell me about this candidate, how are they going to answer that? Like, where are they going to pull it from, et cetera? So sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but like, there's
No,
so many,
I want to go down that rabbit hole.
I call it a kaleidoscope right now, a kaleidoscopic minefield of what we're in, because there are so many vectors and angles of how people are getting their information right now. And you turn it just a little bit and it completely changes the picture. And so I don't know what this end picture is it's frankly never going to change. It's kind of a question of like, what does it look like on election day 2026? And then how does it start to change for 2028 around all of that? But I think that that's one of the things that as we're going into this, we need to realize that it's not going to be any one thing. It's going to be a lot of small things that add up to something, which is why, again, this conversation about gaming is really important, because I think gaming is one of those vectors that, while on its own may not seem like a big deal, but you add it into a bunch of other stuff and it could actually become very influential.
Yeah. Again, well said. You're so well spoken.
Thank you.
Let's wrap this up. What is needed for people to take this platform more seriously?
I think just attention and a recognition that even if it's not something that's part of your day-to-day life, that it is a part of a lot of people's day-to-day lives. And thus, like, not asking you to have to start playing games or anything else like that, but just recognize that we all live in our own bubble, and that it can be helpful to look outside that bubble, especially if you're in an industry like mine, where we're trying to help think about all those different vectors. Like, if I'm a voter or something like that, maybe it's more that you're making sure, like, I have a nephew who's 17, like, what's he talking about on these things? Like, try to get him to tell me, but he won't tell me about all of this. But you can even be like, just recognizing again, where are you getting your content? Where are you getting your information?
Yeah.
What does that look like? I think is a very small step that all of us can take to start talking about it more.
Yeah. Control what you can control, people.
Yes.
Katie, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you and your book?
So my Substack is anchorchange.substack.com. And my book, Disrupting Politics, A Front Row Seat to the Collision of Technology and Democracy, comes out October 6th.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to Gamer Galaxy. And if you liked this episode or learned something new, make sure to hit that subscribe button and rate this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, and see you next time. Bye.